Cool. Thomas, did you want to start?
Okay, yeah, let's get started. Good morning to those people joining us from the UK, and good afternoon to colleagues joining us from China, and good evening to Des, who's joining us the webinar from Australia. So we've got everyone across the world today. Truly global webinar event for everyone. My name is Tom Claiborne. I'm the education sector lead here at the China-Britain Business Council, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Des Kohn from Sinorbis. We're going to talk about how to maximize your education marketing performance. I know that the attendees for today's webinar span across the whole education sector, from colleagues from universities and from schools. So hopefully there's something useful in this session for you all. I've got some questions I've pre-prepared to ask Des, but I'm hoping that my background and knowledge from previously working for universities and working in the education marketing field might be useful to kind of ask the tricky questions or the difficult questions, or get some extra kind of insight out of Des. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. We've called it a fireside chat, so we're going to keep it quite informal, and hopefully it'll be an interesting discussion with some really good insights around what's happening in the education marketing space in China at the moment. So Des, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. Really great to be here.
So to begin with, how has the digital marketing landscape in China evolved over the past 18 months? I've seen just news in the last few days that Ministry of Information and Industry and Technology have forced the likes of WeChat to open up their walled garden and allow links from elsewhere. So that's obviously a major change. But yeah, please go ahead and fill us in with what's been happening in the pandemic recruitment type world we've been living in.
Yeah, for sure. I guess before jumping into the weeds in that, it might be worth explaining why I might actually know about the trends in the last 18 months.
Yep, go ahead. Give us an intro of Sinorbis and what you guys do for those that don't know. That'd be a great start, and then go into that question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the last 18 months in particular have been interesting times in China. And the reason why I guess we're plugged into that so well is because Sinorbis is a software company that helps Western businesses build, measure, and optimize their digital presence for China without the need to physically be there. So being that sort of technical bridge between those teams in the West and China, I really have to stay on top of all of these trends. And I guess it's an interesting one. Tommy, you mentioned the last 18 months. Digital in China has been turbulent since its inception. So it's a never still environment. I suppose in the last 18 months, though, we talk about what's contemporary right now. I guess we've seen a combination of trends that have continued and new things that have emerged. In terms of those sort of continuing trends, I guess we know short form video, which we all knew was going to become, the next big thing globally, which it has, but particularly in China, the likes of Douyin, which is the elephant in the room, I guess now being represented as an app that's been downloaded on over 60% of every smartphone in China, which is phenomenal to think about. And of course, with 50% of those users being under 30 years old, you can only imagine for a university in particular, that's definitely something to keep in mind if you're wanting to find out where your audience and target audience is spending their time digitally. Short form video applications are a big one. But yeah, you're right. You mentioned correctly, there's some new regulations that have come in very recently that have created new trends and changes. We've seen new privacy laws sweeping through the digital sector in China that have had to change how companies and brands operate in terms of how they handle data and lead generation. And also, that sort of famous or infamous, however you want to look at it, change most recently to break down the walled gardens, where links can now be shared between Tencent and Alibaba owned assets, which has never been possible before. So I guess from a Western perspective, that's quite positive, resembling more of the flexibility we may have in the West for sharing things across, say, assets that are owned by Google and Facebook, for example. But it actually creates a lot of challenges for Western companies, especially if you're not physically in China, to make sure that not only are your assets working there, but you've actually got the right means to take the actions you want digitally, right? Create a pathway of conversion, engage with your audience in a meaningful way with the right message at the right time. And yeah, I guess we'll have to see how everyone's going to react to that. But ultimately, if they don't have the ability to do so themselves and they're relying on third parties, it's definitely something that you don't want to have completely outsourced, because then you'll have no idea how to tackle these challenges when they arise.
Yeah, that's really interesting, really great. I think one of the big questions, I think, is always about how to like maximize, get the most out of existing assets that you've got as a university, or almost also what assets are digital assets are essential. I know more and more universities are building Chinese hosted websites and making sure they've got kind of the right types of accounts, because obviously there's many different types of WeChat accounts and different types of other digital assets. So I think, what do you think are the kind of the key core assets and that a university kind of must have, or a school must have, to actually be able to reach the right audiences, and what can recruiters kind of do, and what can they kind of, what principles can they apply to get the most out of them, really? I think that's a really kind of important question.
Yeah, that is really important, because there's a never-ending list of different applications and platforms to be across in China. I suppose to take that all on in one go is an unfair request, let alone an ineffective one. So at Sinorbis, we mainly actually focus on website and WeChat. The reason being is because it doesn't really matter who you are or what you want to do in China. If you don't have a website and WeChat account properly established and functioning well, you're effectively invisible in China as a whole, and have no means of conversion for any other apps or assets you want to be running across, because everything at the end of the day comes back to those two things. So I guess if we're talking about the foundations, yeah, get them in place. But this is where most universities get tripped up. Those things aren't a box to tick and think, oh, all right, done. I have them at whatever level. Moving on to, okay, well, what's next? Because 9 times out of 10, those assets are not set up properly and are not functional for what the university wants and requires. From the website perspective, it's something as simple as actually understanding really how well that website loads in China. Asking Western teams, as we do, we speak with hundreds of universities all around the world, and we have them as clients. But before joining us, we have these discussions to identify, where their Chinese digital is at the moment. And they may say, oh yeah, the website, it's fine. We've got a Chinese website, it's great. And I hear that it loads well. And so ultimately, what ends up happening is that, we run some speed tests and find out that actually it doesn't load well. With each page taking in excess of 20-30 seconds to load. And the fact that they didn't have the visibility on it is just proof in the pudding of what disadvantage you can be if you don't have these feedback mechanisms in place to understand really what's working. Then we get into other things like actually SEO, right? For all of our Western assets, SEO is a given. Of course, you're going to be running some search engine optimization for any particular market. But for China, that's a really difficult ask for an in-house team who are trained in Google and have no idea around the Chinese digital landscape and have no tools and means to do so. So even if you do have a website that can load, well, are you actually optimizing that website so that you as a university can be found? I think we know that for students in China, 2 years prior to admission, they'll start their research journey. So, and I think this is across about 33% of cases, based on some studies. So if you're not visible at the first point of call where people are trying to search, it's much harder to play catch up when you're not part of the consideration set until they find out about you at a much later stage in their journey. So, one thing to have the assets, but then how do you optimize them? Another really classic example is in WeChat and how that gets set up. The what we end up talking about a lot is how website and WeChat, they're not mutually exclusive. They shouldn't be seen as so. In the West, Facebook and website don't really, connect very well. And so we think of it as separate, and we apply the same logic as Westerners in China. But WeChat is not a Facebook equivalent and should not be seen as such, because it'd be a misrepresentation of really what you can use this channel for. Case in point, one of the key ways your website will be accessed is through your WeChat account. So you actually need clear paths of conversion through WeChat that are able to access your website. But when they do so, they actually stay within the WeChat app. So actually, whatever you've built for China has to be specifically optimized to load within the WeChat ecosystem. And again, it's a consideration as Westerners we don't really think of naturally, because why would we? We're not familiar with that user experience. But in China, this is the norm. So if you want to maximize what you're doing with WeChat, you have to properly have all of these pathways to conversion set up and be able to optimize that over time, understand what's working, what isn't. And so it's all well and good to say you've got a website and WeChat, but really understanding, are these assets working well for you? Are you getting the most out of them? It's a completely separate question, and you'll only really know if you've got the visibility and control to do so.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's really key to understand what you've got, and obviously, and how you're using it and how it's working, and making sure that you are optimizing it and understanding how to optimize it. I know that the kind of the search habits are very different for Chinese students than what they are to students in the West. In the UK, for example, you students in the UK might search for the subject they want to study and try and find universities based on subjects, but in China it's not. They don't do that. They just search for just like studying UK or terms, or search for masters or undergraduate, and often just look at the university first that they know, and then they try and find maybe the subject that they want to study. So I guess understanding different kind of search habits and kind of where the students are going to be looking, and obviously making things that kind of maybe tailored towards the parents as well. I think is really a kind of a key consideration when you're creating this content, or when you're optimizing these channels. So I think that's really true. It's very different to if you're looking at it from a Western perspective. The behaviors are very different. Often people ask when is the right time to launch ads in a Chinese digital campaign, or what types of ads do we need to use? Maybe they've got a WeChat account and they're looking at WeChat moments maybe as an ad type, but obviously that's really I guess good if people you're depending on the target audience, or using Weibo and using like Weibo Fencertong as a tool, as a kind of tool to serve kind of boosted posts or whatever, that type of thing. Like, we realize that China's obviously a predominantly postgraduate market for studying in the UK, and obviously it's quite an early market as well. So most Chinese students will get their applications in around about now, really, for an October time for next year. So when do you think the best time to sort of target the kind of ads would be, and what have you seen kind of from your side performance wise? I know obviously for like I know around Chinese New Year is a really good time to target people, because everyone's back at home and they're making their decisions with their families and stuff. So are there any sort of top tips for when's the right time to launch ads, and what kinds of ads do you think are the best types of ads to be trying to use, really?
It's a good question, and each university, I'm sure, is asking these questions amongst themselves, looking at the Chinese calendar, seeing what's important, seeing where their admissions periods are, and of course being constrained. And everyone's probably shouting at the screen right now saying, I would spend media budget whenever, but I have such a limited budget, I have to be very strategic with it. And that's all very true. I think the first thing before jumping into a media campaign, especially when the recruitment teams are in charge of this, mind you, and it's of no fault of their own, because they're KPI'd on getting new leads, getting new admissions, and so they see a media campaign as a means to achieve that. And that's fair enough to an extent. However, it completely removes the strategy that's involved in creating a really effective media strategy and campaign. What I mean by that is that you first need to understand as an institution, how well known are you in China right now? Like, how strong is your brand? Because if you don't have a strong brand and you're putting in a message in front of people 3 weeks before admission time, say, hey, come and study at our institution, and they hadn't heard of you before that point in time, how effective is that message going to be? They've already got a consideration set of 3 other universities. You weren't even remotely part of that. And so to see that message, and you've paid to put that message in front of them, is likely to be wasted. So, the key to any successful campaign is having the right message to the right person at the right time. And the only way you'll be able to do that is firstly understanding, well, do I have good brand awareness in China? If you don't, that's probably where the marketing dollars are best spent, in reaching your audience consistently throughout the year, potentially in small dribbles of media budget, to be boosting your brand, focusing on awareness, focusing on, I guess, maximum reach, as opposed to frequency or lead generation, because your audience isn't ready for that. If you invest in your branding, it doesn't have to be through media, of course, there's going to be offline activities you'll conduct as well. But if you invest in your branding, then you've created a pool of audiences that are likely to be more familiar with your product and your services, so that when you do finally put that message with a call to action, say, hey, apply today, it's going to resonate a lot better. So in terms of timing, I would say that that's really important to consider. That you're right that Chinese New Year is a great time, as people are sort of talking about things, they're discussing with their families, and everyone's come together. But the other side of that coin is that media in that time is incredibly expensive, because everybody is paying for those eyeballs. And so if you have limited budget, potentially bidding for media space in the most expensive time of the year is not the best strategy. So it's important to look at this from a marketing perspective too, as well as and match that in with your understanding of regional specifics in the case of China, and understanding what really is the right move for you. In terms of what channel to choose, because I know, Tom, that was kind of the second half of your question. So it's when, but then also what channels. It'd be worth understanding that different channels will be better for different things. I mentioned earlier around branding and going out for maximum reach. In that case, looking for channels that have a relatively low CPM, cost per mille, cost per 1,000 impressions, that might be sort of where you may be best suited for, because you want to reach the maximum number of eyeballs with your message in your target audience. Not necessarily expecting them to convert and apply in that message, but literally just getting in front of them, encouraging them to engage with you further, maybe following your WeChat account, or landing on your website. And of course, once they're there, you've got a chance to engage with them further, because you may have peer-to-peer recruitment tools on your website, a lead form. You may have, your WeChat account with really great organic content that they can then look at and share with their friends and family. So really important to have that. And then once you're, I guess, closer to admissions time, potentially after you've done that work and built your brand, then yes, look for more performance-based marketing campaigns. Looking at channels like Tencent GDT, where you're able to really narrow in and optimize towards metrics like a cost per lead or cost per engaged visitor, rather than the superficial metrics of cost per click. We're well beyond that in the digital space, and now. Agencies that want to use cost per click as a means of performance on a campaign is pulling your leg, honestly. We want to really be optimizing towards metrics that matter and can actually judge performance. Anyone can click on their website, but if you're able to look at the web traffic from that particular campaign and see that the average time on site was about 5 seconds, well, that either the ad traffic was fraudulent, or they simply didn't target your target audience properly, so that when they landed on the website, they're like, oh wait, no, this isn't for me, and left. So that's a waste of your ad dollars. So I guess putting that all in perspective, these might be some good points to have the right message to the right person at the right time, rather than asking for somebody to apply to your university 3 weeks before they're deciding between 3 other universities and hadn't heard of you. It's a big decision, right? I think I mentioned earlier, like, we're talking about a 2-year time frame. There's lots of opportunities to get in front of people, and marry this timing in with your offline efforts too. But yeah, don't rely on that final, right before application time push. A lot of work needs to be done before that.
Yeah, great. So definitely, yeah, kind of you're having a longer term strategy and plan of engagement is key, and not just spending some money on some advertisement just a few weeks or months before a key kind of milestone in the admission cycle. Yeah, okay. That's really good. So I think I kind of touched on it a bit earlier, that the digital behavior between obviously Western audiences and Chinese audiences is different. And obviously we've already covered that all the channels people are using obviously are very tailored to the Chinese kind of student or whatever user experience, and like what they're used to using and how they're using it. So what do you think the kind of key areas around like sort of digital behavior and the decision journey, kind of how do they differ between Chinese students and other countries, students from other countries, and how do you think this then can inform the messaging of your campaign? So I think that's sort of really understanding, understanding the audience, understanding decisions, and then sort of understanding what messages will resonate or will work. And I think from me, I often see universities just kind of putting out there that they've got a course, a brand new accounting course, and it's or for whatever, and they're really highly ranked in accounting, and they're thinking that that's going to be enough of a message to attract students. And I guess that it probably needs to be more nuanced and a bit more evolved now in a very competitive marketplace. That probably would have worked a few years ago, but maybe not now. So what do you see as kind of good examples of that between like around like messaging and kind of the decision journey?
Yeah, that's spot on. You're right. The competition now is more fierce than it ever has been, and will continue to be so. So understanding your unique selling proposition. This is again why you need the marketers involved and to bring them in. Recruitment and marketing need to be working together for China. The marketing teams, it often gets put in the too hard basket because they're not familiar with Chinese channels, don't have the tools to be able to actually enact on them. And the recruitment teams are left on their own devices typically to look after the whole of China. And it's not fair on the recruitment teams, to be honest. And, ending up with messaging to be like, this is our course, this is how good it is. That's all well and good. But it's all steak with no sizzle, I suppose you could say. Where does the branding come into this? How do you connect with your audience to actually make the content not only relevant, but engaging, so that you've got a means of actually getting them really drawn in? So you're right. In China, there's a couple of key differences. And Tom, I mean, I'm sure you know a lot of those key differences, given your experience with the universities directly. I guess I can think of a few right now. One key thing is the importance of other people in the decision-making process. I don't just mean the families. We'll get into that in a sec, because that's huge. But I mean in terms of just other people. And this is where those, I guess, recruitment tools like peer-to-peer recruitment really come into play, where you've got the ability for prospective students to actually speak with current students about their experience, what life is really like, really cut through the veneer in the marketing to understand what's going on, and get their insight. That's hugely valuable in China. They're likely to share them, your WeChat accounts with their family and friends, and ask them, do you have experience with this university? Oh yeah, my cousin went there. And then they'll want to delve in on that, and that's the most trusted source of information. Like, it's all well and good what you guys can provide, but ultimately that's going to be really important and very powerful in swaying a decision. So I guess it'd be really good as a university to set that up as much as possible through your WeChat content. Encouraging that sharing as much as possible will not only improve your organic growth of your WeChat account over time, but ultimately you're helping facilitate those key decision points by having content that is shareable by nature, and therefore really going to help I guess facilitate these really key decisions that need to be made, as because the students don't make these decisions on their own, and they definitely don't fund it on their own. And that brings to the next point, which is the family. So I guess, in a cultural sense, China, in a general Confucian value, has a lot of weight to the status of a parent and the relation to a child. So in this case, a lot of the decision making is done by parents, not to mention the funding. Obviously, there's remnants of that in every culture, but it's skewed a lot more intensely in China compared to, say, that of the West. So in this regard, when you're producing content, you've got to keep in mind that there are a couple of audiences that you want to target equally. There's the students, and of course you want to get them excited around the idea of coming to your institution is the best place for them, but there's also the parents. And if your content is specifically targeted at the students, there may be some key bits of information that are missed. That means that the likelihood of the parents kind of approving it or preferring your institution over another is diminished. So, making sure you've got content relating to safety on campus, which has become a very key concern of late, even before coronavirus. Making sure, employment opportunities and the employability of graduates is highlighted significantly. Like, all of this is important to students, but in an aggregate, it's more important to parents. So when you're producing content, keep in mind that you're going to have to sprinkle in some content specifically targeted at those groups, so that when the students are sharing this information with their parents, there's enough there that's compelling that your institution is preferred as opposed to someone else. Another key bit of information on this, as just a little bit of advice, is to look at the calendar of where the key emotional touch points are. Tom, you mentioned Chinese New Year. That's really important. Overplayed potentially, and seen as tokenistic in many regards if it's not done well. But really important is when you have the family together, that you leverage that time to facilitate those discussions at the dinner table, right? Because that's ultimately where a lot of these chats will happen. But also looking at the calendar for other key moments, like, for example, when the Gaokao results get released in the middle of the year. This is an incredibly stressful time for the students and the parents alike. So in the lead up to that, sharing study tips, I guess helping with mindfulness and greater perspective, all of these things are great emotional triggers for both parents and students. So you don't need to think of, I'm neglecting one group if I, talk about stuff just for parents. There's actually a lot of content out there that you can be producing that's relevant for both of them, and will resonate emotionally, which again, in turn, will encourage that shareability. So keep in mind, again, look at it through a marketing perspective of who's your target audience, what's going to resonate with them best, and create a way. And I think that kind of insight really only happens when you've got good collaboration between recruitment and marketing teams.
Okay, yeah, great. So kind of content, thinking about content, I guess, is really, really important. And I think you've kind of nailed it there with what's your audience for the content, and is it useful content? I think more and more universities, from looking at it from my perspective, I've seen a lot more getting much better at creating that content. Obviously, asking Chinese students that are currently on campus to create that sort of user-generated content of what their daily life is, what they're doing. I did see, like, a while back, a number of years back, one of the most liked pictures from a university on Weibo was one of the Scottish universities. Like, a Chinese student had gone in and taken a photo of a Morrison's, and it got kind of blown up because the alumni were all retweeting, being like, "Oh, I love that Morrison's. That was so great. I love shopping in there." And I just thought it was just so banal that but that triggered basically all of this emotional engagement from alumni and from current students, that reminiscing about about being on campus at that Scottish university. A really big well-liked post. But I think that's that kind of funny thing is really key to think and to try and encourage students to create the right types of content and think about that. And also the marketing colleagues that are creating the articles for WeChat and stuff, I think just to be creating stuff that on the face of it might not seem so direct as a tool, but can be kind of sharing useful information or tips or just information about the, for example, the UK and what you need to do for what kind of types of accommodation there are, and what the different benefits, pros and cons, and yeah, kind of useful tips about life in the UK, for example, I guess is really welcomed. And I think, yeah, some universities, I guess, are already really good at doing that sort of content, but others have maybe haven't been, kind of developing that yet. So I think that's, yeah, you're right. That's a really key thing to kind of, I guess, look at the calendar and make a sort of really clear content calendar, and yeah, where you're creating this content and which channels you're going to kind of push it out on, I guess, is really, really important.
It's critical because you mentioned it, I guess, in the question, creating content for the new tax and accounting course. That's great, and you should be informative, but no one's going to have an emotional attachment to your accounting degree, no matter how good it is. What's important here, if you want growth and connection with your audience in China, you need to be thinking outside of that and what's really relevant to them. Once you have that, you're able to tap into that. Everything is possible.
Okay, great. Okay, my next question is around kind of going back to what we sort of touched on earlier about some of the digital channels. I think everyone knows, like, yeah, WeChat, Weibo, and probably has a website. But what are the kind of some of the latest development digital channels? We've already talked a little bit about Douyin, about TikTok, and how it's kind of growing, and short form videos are a real thing. What kind of what are the channels that and the latest ones you've seen with sort of the best performance, and which ones are not being kind of utilized yet by universities, or which ones are but maybe not so successful, and why? And can you kind of give some tips about what kind of should be looked at as kind of a must use if you've already, like I said, if you've already got an optimized website and WeChat and you're looking for the kind of the next steps, really, where should you be looking, and what should be trying to achieve with them? I think that's for me what the kind of question should be. And I guess that's really kind of, I think there's more obviously awareness with what TikTok, and more universities I know are using it for UK recruitment, and I guess it's that they know the kind of how that works. But what else? I know there's Bilibili and others, and what's the difference, I guess, between them, and what should you be doing with them, really? I think because I think from the outside looking in, they all look kind of fairly similar. So which ones do different things, and which ones how do you choose, really?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. From the Western perspective, it's an unknown unknown, right? Of all these other channels and how they get used. I'll caveat what I'm going to say by saying this at the outset. We often conflate and bring our Western perspective into China, and it always doesn't work. Case in point, if you think you've done WeChat well and need to now look at the next best thing, just remember that WeChat is not Facebook in China. It's not a channel that less and less young people are using every year, like Facebook is in the West. WeChat represents 1/3 of all time spent on mobile in China. All right, let that sink in. It's not a social media app. It's a super app that gets used for everything in daily life in China by every age demographic and by about 90% of the population. So it's not something to think, oh, on to the next thing. Everything else on top of WeChat is gravy, right? But WeChat is critical to get right. So don't think that you have to keep up with the latest, trends and the generation by leaving a legacy application like WeChat. What you'd be doing by chasing these other applications is really enhancing and supplementing what you should be doing on WeChat continuously and effectively. So that's kind of the disclaimer before this, is that WeChat is going to still be by far the most important app you use in China. Now, the other apps, of course, short form video, like you mentioned, Tom. I mean, this kind of content, not only is it good because it's being consumed, but it's being shared in similar ways as well. Like I mentioned, with 60% of every mobile in China having Douyin specifically, not to mention all the other short form video competitors out there. It's really, I guess it is important if you are looking to take that to the next stage. Say you've mastered WeChat, your SEO and your website's beautiful. You've got excellent conversion pathways there. You run good campaigns. What's next? Yes, look into Douyin. Given that 50% of the audience in Douyin is under 30, as a university, this is where your target audience is going to be spending a lot of their time digitally. So in terms of creating short form video, this can go hand in hand with what you're doing in the West, because for the first time, a Chinese app has dominated the Western market. So we have TikTok. And for a lot of universities and your domestic marketing teams, you may already be leveraging TikTok for some content, given that you're also targeting a young audience. It might be good to look into how that content can be shared and supplemented and leverage the existing content that you're using for those channels, as well as creating specific content for China, be it leveraging your existing students, your alumni, to share their content. That's going to be really important. But ultimately, if you want to convert traffic from these channels, rather than just community engagement, because ultimately, I assume you'd all want results, you'll need to have a proper website and web presence set up so that you can direct the traffic to that they can then convert as a new lead or application for you, or engage further by researching more about your institution, what courses you have available, etc. Is going to be the good fit, and they'll engage with your other channels from there. This is just like an engagement and touch point, but ultimately feeds into those other channels. And again, this is why I mentioned from the beginning, web and WeChat are your foundations. It's what you need to do anything in China. If you didn't have that set up, having the best Douyin account in the world will only get you so far. There are lots of other channels though that will be good to spend your time across, and I guess it depends if you're targeting for undergraduate students or postgraduate. Channels like Zhihu, is a particularly useful channel. Bilibili, Xiaohongshu, these are all really important platforms where your target audience is likely to be spending some time on mobile, in which case it's probably good to be using those channels actually for ads. Firstly, it's less expensive than running ads on WeChat, and you've got the ability to actually convert the traffic from those ads. Very recently, Tencent has changed their data privacy policies so that for all ads being run on the Tencent GDT, which is their network across display, video assets, outside of WeChat, landing pages, which you'd probably want for lead forms, have to have an ICP license, which means that they have to be hosted in China. So this means that if your website isn't hosted inside China for whatever reason, you can't convert the traffic from those ads. But with these other channels, you can. The important thing to note on all this, as I said, and imagine if this is written in text as huge asterisks. As we said from the outset, everything in China is in flux all the time. What I'm telling you now and the current state of affairs with how this is being regulated and what the rules are, if you are listening to this as a recording in maybe 2 weeks' time, it might be different. It changes that fast. And so while these channels are very useful right now, and they could be quite effective for you as marketing tools, they may be different very soon. Again, that's why understanding intimately the importance of website and WeChat is so important, is because they kind of are always going to be there. That's why they're your foundations. They're not built on trends. The regulation on how they get used by Western companies doesn't change too frequently, and that's why they need to be set up properly. And then if you're looking to supplement that, yes, look at those other channels, look to run ads on them, which you're likely to get good conversion from, and test and adapt. Ultimately, that's where it's really going to come from. You'll spread that media budget maybe across a couple of different channels, see where you're going to get best engagement. And an app like Zhihu, which is sort of like Wikipedia, more Quora, more information heavy and information focused. That might be better for ads that actually have a call to action for application, given that you've got someone who's in that research hungry phase who wants to know more. Maybe not the best option for an awareness advertisement, right? Given that they're already in their research journey. So have a think about how those apps are used from a user perspective, and that will guide what kind of content would resonate, what message would work in that context.
That's great. I always get around the sort of the metrics you talked about, obviously, about how you're buying your how the types of way you're buying your ads. Do you want to buy CPM, or which different sort of strategies that you're using to to get impressions versus obviously the old like kind of click through rates and stuff. But I think when looking at sort of metrics for assessing how well it's performed, how well your campaigns performed, how well your ads have performed, what do you think are some good metrics to be looking for, good tips? And I guess again, coming at this from if the UK team, for example, are really familiar with the metrics on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, or YouTube, whatever, but then they're looking at a Chinese campaign and the metrics obviously are different, or could appear to be very different. What do you think is a sort of, have you got any tips around what are the sort of the key metrics that you really need to look for, or how to sort of judge the success of your campaign across these different platforms in China, which obviously the reach might be huge, but no one might be clicking on your ad, for example, and why?
Yeah. Yeah, this is the age-old question, right? I would say that no need to reinvent the wheel for China. All of the metrics that you look at and the standards that you apply in performance, that should be carried through to your media in China. It gets bought the same way on a cost per mille basis. And it can be optimized accordingly. The difference is that, of course, in China, there's no self-serve media. So very important you have all the right feedback mechanisms in place to ensure that your campaigns and your marketing in general in China is being run well. Getting reports once a quarter or once a month just isn't sufficient if you want to really optimize it, right? In terms of what metrics you should look out for, firstly, identify what the goal of the campaign is, first and foremost. We talked about this earlier. Is this going to be a branding campaign versus is this going to be a campaign more focused on lead generation, or is this going to be a campaign focused on engagement in our content? In which case we will increase the chance of converting them, because once they land on our website, they chat with the peer-to-peers, they engage with our WeChat account, and we sort of have them in as an audience that we can then nurture over time. So firstly, identify the goal. If every campaign you run is going to be just coming down to, well, how many leads did we get? You're going to run out of that low-hanging fruit really quickly, because again, like we talked about, there's going to be people who didn't know you, and you're trying to tell them to apply to your university and they've never heard of you before. So I would say that if you're running an awareness-based campaign, look at those basic metrics, like what the lowest cost per mille is for your target audience, because ultimately you want to have a couple of different audiences set up and experiment with those messages and see what resonates best. If you're going for more of an engagement piece and you want to drive traffic to your assets for them to engage with your content directly, I would say don't settle for the superficial metrics out there like cost per click. That can be very misleading in China, and agencies love using it because it's not hard in China to get a click. Without mentioning any names, ad fraud in China is a lot more prevalent than it is in the West. And so if you're looking to gauge the success of an engagement campaign, look at a metric like cost per engaged visitor. And by this, I mean, and you can set the rules and parameters for how you define this, but a cost per visitor or click, but that visitor stays on the page for X number of seconds. And that way you're able to discern the quality of the traffic coming to your site and really identify if the campaign is good or not. But like I said, if you don't have the feedback mechanisms in place, like the right tools and analytics to be able to know this, it's really hard to ascertain where the success is going to be coming from. So making sure you have the right tools is essential to get into the weeds like that, and to hold your agencies accountable for the traffic they're bringing to the site, and ultimately cost per lead. Now, I mentioned, that all the principles should apply between your Western media spend and your Chinese media spend. And in this regard, that is true. But obviously, how the numbers you should be expecting may be a little bit different, given that Chinese user behavior is different. China has, an enormous marketplace. And so it's very easy to burn through budget if you haven't narrowed down your target audience well enough. So if you're looking for a specific cost per lead, that's all well and good, but you'll have to experiment to find out where the sweet spot is, not only in terms of getting the right cost per lead down to a reasonable level, but that the quality of that lead is going to be there. the agency saying, oh, I got the lowest cost per lead on record. How good was that campaign? Let's do it again. Well, that means nothing if the conversion rate of those leads is zero. So, again, making sure you've got that feedback loop in place, identifying not only are you achieving those metrics, but what does the quality of that traffic and engagement look like? And then you'll know if you're working or not.
Great, that's really great. Have you got any kind of recent examples of campaigns that you've been working on, or that you've seen that you thought, oh, that was really interesting, or that was really good what they've done, or they've done something different and it's really worked? So those kind of like, yeah, what's the latest things you've seen happening, and what these campaigns doing that other campaigns aren't doing to be successful?
So without mentioning any names, of course, because all that is confidential, but there was this one particular campaign recently that I think might be good to talk about, with a university that has a quite a good global ranking, like a decent one, top 100, and that can go a long way in China. But I suppose this university, that they know that message can resonate, but they weren't really sure what the other USPs were that they can talk to. So the media campaign that we ran was a really good opportunity to test this. We had it across about 6 weeks, and different creatives. One was, of course, top ranked university. You have to put that message in there if you can. But the others, we tested them in terms of life on campus and employability as well. There's only so much budget. You don't want to spread it too thin. So just choosing these 3 messages to start with was good, and choosing a couple of different target audiences based on interest-based targeting in China. So having these variables go into the campaign would go live. But what made it a success is that we were optimizing the campaign as it happens, because obviously we've got real-time data on this, and seeing which audience was resonating with which creative. And then in real time, reallocating the budget to those more successful audiences and creatives to drive down, in this case, we were looking at a cost per engaged visitor, and then a cost per lead later, to drive the best result for each one of those. So the campaign worked really well, and we ended up with a lot of insight at the end of it, which was fantastic, to understand what audiences actually are resonating with which messages. And the follow-up from that was that the applications for that intake period were 20% higher than the year prior. So I guess I call that campaign a big success, not just because it achieved the results materially of more applications, but the insights that the university got at the end of it were invaluable, in that firstly, it dictated how they can construct their organic messaging going forward too, to understand, okay, now we know more about our USP in China, what people value. But it set up a good precedent and standard of quality for all future campaigns as well. So I guess it's really important that the takeaway from that is, when you're doing a campaign in China, don't set and forget. Don't set it all up, press live, and then see what happens at the end. These things need to be optimized in real time and have that attention put in, to not only maximize your budget, but to also make sure that those insights are relevant at the end.
Okay, yeah, I think that's great. Is there anything you can share with us? Which of the messages shared with which audience? Did the like you said before, did the employability message share more, like get more traction with the slightly older demographic, which probably were the parents? And was it mainly the mums looking for the kids? Is that the the insights?
Well, yeah. So, I can say this much: the ranking message was the best performing message overall. But that was, to no one's surprise, exactly. But what we found is that the other 2 messages, the employability was incredibly strong, but the life on campus wasn't.
Okay.
And the theory behind this is that at that stage, given that the timing close to the application period, the life on campus is not really part of the importance consideration set at that point in time. It's mainly around sort of those more hardcore benefits, like employability or how the prestige and high ranking, etc. Which we'll have to test with more campaigns in the future. But ultimately, yeah, the theory goes that talking about life on campus and the quality of the experience overall as like a life venture for these students is best served earlier in their consideration journey rather than right before application time.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So obviously we've only got, I think, about 10 minutes left in our allotted time today, but I've got a couple of final sort of questions for you. What do you think the key challenges people can expect to face in their marketing in the next year? We've said everything is always in flux, and I think we've already alluded to the fact that there's a brand new kind of personal information protection law coming into play in November, and that's going to shake up the need for licenses for your sort of digital assets, potentially your websites and whatever on that space, and making sure you're compliant with the new regulations on kind of collecting data and all that kind of stuff. Is there anything else that you think is going to be a big sort of change to the ecosystem, or anything that's going to pose a challenge for people already kind of operating in it over the next 12 months? I realize obviously that's a tough question, but what do you foresee the changes that are coming in very soon impact being?
Well, I'll get my crystal ball out for this one. But I guess based on some insight, and we're only looking at next year, right? We're not asking to predict too far. But borders all are opening up at the same time around the world, which opens up international students. And that happening at the same time as, let's talk about the UK here, right? Where I know that a lot of institutions have upped their game in digital in China, have created presences digitally where they didn't have before. So the competition is actually now going to be higher than ever has been, with people competing for digital eyeballs in China and attention. So what does this mean for your institution? If you've set up web and WeChat, again, you've ticked that box and thought, okay, done, what's next? Again, I asked the question, is it set up properly? Is it set up better than your competitors? Have you done that analysis to understand that? How good is your SEO ranking on these keywords, and how do you rank against your competitors? If you don't have the right tools to know that, that will be a good indicator to see how successful 2022 is going to be. The digital landscape, I suppose, one of the most relevant things that's changing. You mentioned what's happening in China domestically, and that's obviously super important. But we need to also take into account as an institution, what are the other universities in the UK doing? And with Brexit affecting EU application numbers, China is now incredibly important for every UK university for international recruitment. You're all feeling it the same way, and the competition is going to be higher than it ever has been. So I guess finding out where your edge is and how you can perform better digitally in China will be critical to your success. If you stand still, you're being left behind.
Very nicely put. Don't stand still. Keep moving forwards. Okay. So we've got a few minutes to go, and I just wonder what your final piece of advice would be that you'd share with people trying to get into the market. I think I probably know what you're going to say. It's probably make sure your WeChat and your web are fully optimized and working well. And we've already covered that. And before you make any decisions to experiment with new channels, think about what it is you're experimenting with before. It's probably going to be something along those lines. But I'll hand over to you for your kind of final thoughts, final advice, and final tips for kind of engaging with what you've already highlighted as an increasingly competitive kind of digital marketplace for getting the engagement from prospective students and their parents.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to be a broken record, so I'll have to change the narrative slightly on that. I think a really important point, because we've talked a lot about what the universities can do specifically, what they should be looking at specifically, how they should take this on. The trouble with a lot of UK universities is that historically, while it's very good to have partners for China that help things along and can help with added resources, and CBBC is a great example of that. But a lot of UK universities have taken that to some kind of extreme, where they've outsourced entirely their China operations to agencies in China. And the clear issue with that is that, it's all well and good for us to have this discussion and identify these points, but if you don't have the means to make these changes, then what is the point? When these things get outsourced, it's often because it's in the too hard basket, right? Like, you want to create a website for China, but your digital team in-house can only make something that's hosted in the UK, and that they only know Google. And that's fair enough. They're not using the right tools, and that's why we exist. But ultimately, I would say for every university, if you feel that you don't have this, make sure you have at least some level of transparency, control, and visibility on your digital marketing in China, because that's the fundamental principle that will allow you to make all these really great and effective changes and get better results in China. If everything's outsourced to an agency entirely, which in many cases I know in the UK it is, you've missed that opportunity and have relied on the initiative of an agency who's very happy to keep the status quo going for your success in your most important international market. So it seems ludicrous when you put it that way, but I suppose it's been understandable that's the case, and that's really why we tried to make a digital solution for China, and have done so, is to really bridge that gap and solve that problem so that the universities can actually now take control themselves and take on China with the same level of expertise and control that you do for every other international market. And the Great Firewall doesn't have to become that issue that prevents you from doing so.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a lot for your time today, Daz. I really enjoyed this discussion we've had about what to do and what not to do, and I hope the audience find it useful. And I hope if anyone watches the recording, and obviously within the next few weeks they find it useful, and what you've said hasn't totally all changed, but obviously there are some key legislation coming in to be watched out for. And I think the personal information protection law in November is going to be a big one that everyone's going to have to get their head around when it comes to data collection so basically lead generation in China. So I think that's something to kind of my tip would be to anyone on this or watching this in the next few weeks will be come and talk to us at CBBC, or go and have a look around at what changes are coming in, and talk to your friendly Chinese law firms about how these might be impacting your organization, and keeping abreast basically of any kind of major changes to the ecosystem that might be impacting your organization or impacting how you do things, because you don't want to get caught out doing things in old ways when things have changed. Anyway, that's really my final comments, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you today, Des, and I hope the audience on this found it useful or interesting at least, and I hope to see you again in another similar event soon.
Likewise, Tom, thank you so much. Great to be here.
So to take care, and I'll end this webinar now. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.